All right, guys. So welcome back to another Q&A. I've got Ian. He is going to be basically co-hosting with me in-flight music. And what we're going to do is kind of essentially take questions from anyone who's in the chat now. Can you guys all hear me? Let me know. Somebody say something in the chat. Just submit questions if you guys can hear me. Okay, cool. All right. So what we're going to do is basically take questions of people who are in the chat now, and then I'm going to go through on the actual text questions from the past week and answer those as well. So does anybody have any questions they want to start with? I know Fat Hedonist looks like you had some questions. You want to elaborate on your questions? Maybe his mic's not connected. So I'm going to start with Fat Hedonist questions. Your mic's not up. Okay. Can you set it up real quick or no? Because I did your second question. I kind of wanted a little bit more information from you, if possible. I'm going to go ahead and answer your first question though. So what are stems? So stems are basically, it's like a track out. So it's the loop of all the kick, all the snare, all the hi-hats, each individual instrument like separately spread out. Those are the stems. Ian, do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, the whole purpose of stems is to make sure that the your customer, for example, if someone just bought one of your beats, that way they're able to actually go in and mix the beat either themselves, or they're able to send the beat to a mix engineer. And by having everything separated in terms of individual drum hits, the individual instruments, your bass, your vocals, the mix engineer will have a much easier time going in and actually mixing the individual sounds to make it sound like one cohesive project.
Exactly. And also, just to add on to that a little bit more, it's also done for remix competitions, stuff like that. So anytime you see a remix competition, they'll generally have stems that you can download, and then you can process each individual instrument or drums separately from each other. So that's the purpose of stems.
And another term that you might hear that is exactly the same as stems are trackouts. So anytime you hear trackouts, they're talking about stems as well. Some people will kind of have those separate. I know some mix engineers, they'll call stems groups of tracks. So basically like buses, those would be considered stems. And then the individual tracks would actually be called the trackouts. But typically in common language, most people are talking about the same thing when you hear trackouts versus stems.
Okay.
Okay. I think I got my mic working.
Yep, I can hear you now. So yeah, since we're on you right now, can you elaborate on your second question? So in the channel sampler window, are you trying to determine like the length as in like seconds of the sample?
Yeah, or milliseconds or whatever. So yeah, you open up you have your sample on your channel rack and you click on it and it has the sample there, right?
Right.
There's no timings there.
Yeah. Why would you want to know the timings? I'm just curious.
For side chains and things like that, and also to help pick a sample. Like when I'm going through it, and I put, instead of putting it directly on the playlist, right? I put it in the channel rack.
Mm-hmm.
I have no way of knowing how long that is.
That's exactly why I don't like using the channel rack. That's why I use the playlist, is because that way I can actually see the length of the sample, and I can easily automate it and cut it shorter, or just like drag it shorter if I need to. That's a big reason why I use the playlist. Ian, do you have anything that you want to add on to that?
Well, I'm gonna add on to that, to the second part of that, is that goes into the part where in the playlist, I would like, when you scroll in, I still got 1 and 2 and 3, and I want like 1.1 or something. I would like when I look at somebody, I've been watching a lot of videos, and I see watching Ableton, and in their channel, their playlist thing, it's divvied out. So if I want to, calculate something, it seems like it would be much easier to do that way.
Right.
That's all.
Okay. Ian, do you have anything that you want to add to this?
Yeah. Since you're using the channel rack, what you can do inside of the sampler. So say, for example, you have a drum hit. In the channel sampler, you'll actually see the waveform down at the bottom. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about?
No, that's exactly what I was. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Yeah.
So right click on that waveform and then click Edit in Audio Editor. And then at the very top right, well, not the very top right, but towards the top right, you'll actually see the length divided into minutes, seconds, and milliseconds for you.
Okay, but there's no way to do that in the sampler itself.
No, you won't see those numbers inside the sampler.
Okay.
And so then for the grid, you can actually change the snap settings, which will let you zoom in with different grid lines. So go to the magnet tool, and then you select either half beat, quarter beat, half step, so on and so forth. And then when you zoom in or drag any of the individual items on that grid, it'll snap to exactly those settings for you.
And so when you open in, is that opening in Edison, Ian?
No, yeah. This is inside of the arrangement view, the playlist.
I'm kind of curious. So you right click on the waveform and then you go to edit an audio editor?
Yeah, and that is Edison.
Yeah, that's for looking at the timing.
Yeah, okay, that's what I thought. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's what I was talking about. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, that kind of answers what I had.
Yeah, so it's up to you. I mean, we can talk about this a little bit more later on, but let's go ahead and move on to some other questions. Does anybody else in the chat now have any questions? I know, Tantra, you had questions about processing sub. I'll get to that in a second. I want to see if anybody else with the mic has any questions. Jordan, Jake. Guess not. All right, Tantra, I'll go ahead and take your question. How should you process sub bass? So generally, it really depends on the sample itself. But generally what I'll do is a little bit of EQ and then maybe add a limiter on it or some compression. And the reason for that is just to make sure that certain frequencies in the sub bass aren't like hitting harder or louder than other frequencies. But that just kind of depends. Ian, you have anything you want to add on to that?
Actually, I was just taking a look at something else from the previous question about, I know he was talking about using delay time, or not delay times, but the sample length to figure out his sidechain and whatnot. So I wanted to just add in this delay calculator / reverb calculator from Nick Fever. I think I found this guy through Lifestyle Did It. He had a tutorial about doing exactly what Fathead was talking about with the whole getting the timing exactly right to do your sidechain. So go to, if you just type in delay calculator or reverb calculator into Google, the very first link should be Nick Fever. And right there, you're actually...
Hey, K4L, can you mute your mic, please?
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
But yeah, go to nickfever.com, and then they have a delay calculator. So once you get those numbers from your sample, you could enter that into the calculator, and then you'll get all the timings that you need for reverbs, delays, your side chains, and whatnot.
No problem, man. For me, that's just like way more work than what I want to do, which again leads me back to why I just use the playlist and just use my eyes when I'm sidechaining.
Yeah, or your ears.
Yeah, or your ears. Yeah.
You should be able to just hear. I personally don't do sidechain timings because I assume that I'm not going to be, sidechaining exactly a quarter of a beat or whatever it is. Yeah, I always just use my ears, but to each their own, for sure.
Yeah.
What was the last question that we were going over?
So we were talking about how to process sub bass. I was saying that usually what I do is just basically subtle EQ. I mean, sometimes I go crazy with the EQ, but usually I do EQ and then limiting or compression depending on whether or not the sub bass needs it.
Exactly. Yeah, you're really not wanting to do too much beyond that for your sub.
Okay.
You want your sub to be as pure as possible.
Yeah.
The strongest sub frequency, the waveform is just a pure sine wave. So
yeah.
All the extra stuff that you tend to hear in basses, that's not coming from the sub bass itself. It's coming from the other frequencies above the sub.
Well, actually, I will add on to this because sometimes I do. Sometimes I will add saturation or distortion on sub bass as well to get those extra harmonics and make it, pop through on other speaker systems. Like you can do this a couple ways. You can layer bass sounds. So you can do you can do your just basic sine wave sub bass and then layer another bass sound on top of it, or you could add saturation onto the sub bass. And I would recommend just experimenting with both those methods and kind of seeing what you like doing the best. And it's one of those things that in certain situations.
Am I audible?
Okay, hold on. I can't hear you. Say what?
Yeah, Tantra, you're audible. I could hear you.
Okay. So I'm literally processing sub bass in such kind of that I'm removing all the high frequencies. Usually it does not stay in a sub bass. And I'm just keeping the frequencies below 100 hertz. And I'm supposedly adding sound goodizer in the preset A because I think it makes the bass completely mono. And it also adds some saturation or distortion in the bass. And usually I do that in sub bass and I layer some top basses and I just remove the bass part of the bass and just boost up the high frequencies of the top bass and drive the distortion a bit higher on that bass. I just call it that cashmere bass or something like that.
Yeah, that'll definitely give you good results for sure. Yeah, people make fun of sound goodizer all the time, but it's basically just, Maximus. It's just a limiter with some saturation. So
yeah, sound goodizer, you can actually see the presets in Maximus. If you load up Maximus and go into the presets, they have all the sound goodizer presets in there. All right, let's move on. Does anybody else in the chat now, K4L, do you have any questions? Do you want to turn your mic on and ask?
Yeah, am I audible?
It's kind of noisy, but yeah.
Oh, okay, so I was chatting with my friend and it's a question of his. What he likes to do is he usually pirate some sample packs and then check them out, and then whichever he likes he buys them. So we were just having a discussion about a song he published. So he was asking me that he used a pirated sample in one of his tracks, but after he uploaded the song on Spotify, he downloaded the pack. So will there be any legal issue or some sort of thing like that?
Go ahead and mute your mic, and then I'll answer your question.
Okay.
So I think what you're asking is your friend likes to essentially test out the track or the sample packs before he buys them and make sure that he likes them. And I mean, I don't know. This is a tricky subject. Like personally, I'd say there's probably nothing wrong with doing that if you want to test and just make sure that you like the samples that you're getting, as long as you're actually buying them, if you end up using them. And I think what you're saying is that what he did was he used a sample, but then he ended up buying the pack. If he ended up buying the pack later and he's using a sample in the pack that he bought, then there shouldn't be any issues there. Ian, what do you think about this?
Yeah, there's not going to be an issue. I don't recommend doing that, but since he is covering, you know, his tail at the end there.
Yeah.
He should be good to go. But yeah, we definitely recommend just getting it outright so that you don't run into any weird issues or situations. But if you now own the pack, you're good to go. You're fine.
Yeah, I'll add on to this a little bit. I would recommend if you're gonna get sample packs, find people who sell sample packs or give out sample packs that have a preview of the samples so that you can hear them. That's a better way of doing this than pirating it. Like for example, the sample packs that I have on my website, I basically go through and I do like a demo test of all the different samples that are in the thing. So I do a video so you can hear all the samples before you buy it, so you know exactly what you're getting. So I'd recommend getting from people who do that as opposed to trying to pirate it. And yeah, Splice is another really good option, and Loop Cloud as well. So thanks for that, Fat Hedonist.
Yeah, right. Both have free memberships where you can start downloading stuff right away. So yeah, definitely check both of those out for sure.
Yeah, and also, I mean, there's just so many free samples out there anyway. It's like you almost don't even need to. I mean, Splice is great because you have unlimited access to every sample, and you can like pick and choose individual samples, so you're not limited to an entire pack. Yeah, Cymatics has tons of free samples, so there's in this day and age, there's almost no point in even doing that. Anyone else in here have any questions? Jordan, you have any questions, or are you just kind of hanging out?
Yeah, sorry, I thought my mic was not working for a while because I had it muted. Gotcha. How do you, when you're first learning music production and music theory, where do you start? It seems like there's a bunch of different points, from melodies to drums to the DAW itself. Where do you recommend starting and kind of branching out from that?
Okay, so where do you start as far as music
learning in general? Like, would you start with melodies, drums? Like, what's a good?
Oh, just when I'm creating a track in general. Okay.
How should you build a foundation for music production?
Okay, so it really depends on genre. What genre are you producing?
Kind of R&B, kind of trap. I'm kind of just messing around with everything. Like, I asked a question about like Calvin Harris Slide a few hours ago.
Gotcha.
So
okay, yeah. Okay, so what I tend to do, for those genres is I start with either chord progression or melody, generally chord progression. So that's usually the first thing I do is I kind of play around on the keys and come up with some sort of chord progression, and then when I'm happy with it, then I kind of go from there. For some genres, like some EDM genres, I'll start with drums sometimes. So there's not like you have to start with one thing, and everyone does slightly different things. I think most people probably start with chords or melody and then add on to it from there. What about you, Ian? What do you do?
Typically, I start with a melody, but man, I've been doing this for so long, I've switched it up even within the same genre. So sometimes I go in drums first, and I'll treat those drums more like sort of a reference. So I'll just kind of get a basic foundation. So I'm not going like ham with the drums there. So it's basically, just your kick drum, your snare, your hi-hats. But, if you're making trap, the hi-hats aren't going crazy. It's just your basic two-step. And I use that as my metronome. And sometimes, because of where the kicks are placed, that'll give me like a little pocket in terms of trying to come up with my melodies. Even the rhythm of the chords will change a little bit because I did the drums first. But I'm curious, do you play any instruments, or do you have any background with music besides?
No, not at all. So like I'm going from scratch.
Okay, so what I recommend, if you're just now getting started and you're into R&B and trap, I definitely recommend looking up piano tutorials, or at least tutorials that talk about using the piano roll to make your melodies. And that way you're actually, getting more into what really makes R&B sound like R&B. And same deal with trap, because the trap melodies are like really easy nowadays. So I feel like that will get you a nice head start versus trying to learn how to do the drums first. The drums will, I think the drums will come a lot easier once you get the melodies and chord progressions down. I think that's most important, especially if you're into R&B.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and Jordan, just to add on to that, I don't know if you saw my most recent tutorial.
Yeah, I saw that.
Okay, all right. Well, I was going to say that's a good place to start because that sounds like kind of where you're at is basic, basic
Facts.
theory.
Yeah, that tutorial right there. That explains the exact foundation that you need to get started and not play a bunch of guessing games. So definitely check that out.
One other thing I wanted to know was how do you pick a BPM? What I've been doing is I just been going to songs I like and just saying like what's the BPM and just starting with that. Is there like a rhyme or reason to how you choose your BPM?
So I'd say that's actually a really good way to do it, especially in the beginning. One thing I talk about a lot is using reference tracks, and you can use reference tracks for everything. So BPM is a good example. Arrangement is another good example. Kind of copying the overall mix of the reference track and trying to get your sound similar to that. It's another good example of using reference tracks. So that's a good place to start. Generally, certain genres do tend to have specific tempos kind of involved with them. I think it's less with EDM especially. EDM is very specific with genres. I think it's a little bit less with pop and R&B and trap, but there's still general ranges that you want to stick with. And Ian, what do you think? What are like common R&B? I think R&B is usually like a lot slower. So like what, 70 to 90 or something?
Exactly. Spot on. Yeah, that's R&B for you. And then if you're doing more trap stuff later on, you're going to want to double those tempos. So you'll be looking more at 140 to 180 would be ridiculously fast. But I've heard some trap beats with 180 tempos that they actually pull it off. But I think a lot of the modern trap songs are more around 150, 160. So that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, cool. I always hear that too, but then one thing I've noticed, and I could be off base here, but I seem like a lot of the popular stuff, like I guess more pop trappy stuff that you hear on the radio, especially like Tyga and stuff like that like the twerk tempo, that's all at more like 100 BPM.
Yeah.
Well, and 128. Yeah, that's another common one. Or 130. Yeah, 130, 128.
That's that club music.
Yeah, exactly. That's music. Yeah, that's the four to the floor club music. But then there's also a lot of hip hop at that tempo too. Mm-hmm. But the twerk stuff, like a lot of the Tyga stuff, is at 100 BPM, 105, somewhere in there.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Also, when you start a project, I know me personally, sometimes I love your idea about referencing. That's definitely what you should be doing. But eventually you'll get to a point where you might have a rhythm in your head or you might have a melody in your head. And what I recommend is just sitting down and hitting that tap tempo and going with whatever you're feeling in that moment, because that might help you kind of dictate your own style and your own, I don't even know what to call it, but basically like your own emotion and feeling in the moment versus directly copying something else. So you might discover something by doing that.
Yeah, for sure. Anyone else in here have questions? Looks like K before L might have something. I'm going to go ahead and see if there are any other questions from earlier in the week. Okay, so Jordan, we already answered your question about the BPM. Just to add on to that, one last thing. I'm sure you can Google it and maybe like find a chart and just print that out, have that, like, you can hang it up or put it next to your studio, and that way you kind of have that to reference. So that might be a good thing to do. Maybe I'll create a chart like that. It's actually not a bad idea. Okay, yeah. So this suggestion, Fat Hedonist, I'm gonna get with you about this later. I don't know if you saw my message, but I really like this idea and I want to do a video on it. Okay, so Delta Misfits 67 says, okay, so I'm completely new, literally to all of this. I used to play the acoustic guitar and played pretty shitty until it got stolen. I bought FL Studio producer version and I'm really interested in learning and I more or less know my way around it, but where the hell do I even begin? Okay, so we actually kind of touched on this a little bit with Jordan's question, but I mean, you begin by first of all, if you need to watch some tutorials, maybe type in, how to make a basic trap beat, or how to make your first trap beat, or how to make your first insert genre beat track, whatever. And then once you've watched maybe a couple of those tutorials and you understand how to actually navigate through FL Studio, then you just got to get in there and start making music. And like we talked about with, I think it was Jordan, I start with chord progression or a melody, come up with that idea. If you have a MIDI keyboard and you can learn a little bit of piano, play some keys, that'll definitely help with this. So you can come up with chord progressions. Definitely check out my last tutorial. It'll get you up to speed on the basics of playing piano. And just start producing music, and the first few tracks that you produce are probably going to suck, and you just got to try and get through them as quickly as possible. And the more you do it, the better you're going to get. Ian, do you have anything you want to add on to that?
To kind of piggyback off of the last thing you said, definitely don't dwell too hard or too long on any of your individual tracks. They're not going to be what you're looking for. And on top of that, you're not going to be able to fix them to the point that they are going to be, the one, So it's really about quantity at the beginning, because none of those are going to be a hit, and they're going to be such a mess that you're not going to be able to really do anything with them, at least not for, not at this stage. So just keep making beats and move on to the next one whenever you get stuck. Don't try to fix that one. Just learn what you ran into, look up tutorials for that, try to, ask questions about that in the next live Q&A, and go on from there. But don't get, caught up on trying to make that one perfect beat.
I 100% agree with that. All right, let's move on. So John II says, does anyone here know how to make your guitar sound better using stock effects in FL Studio? So this question is a little bit vague. I need to know what kind of guitar sound you're going for, because there's electric guitar, there's acoustic guitar. And this goes for people just in general. When you're asking questions in the Q&A, like during the week, if we can, try and elaborate on your question so that I know exactly what it is that you're looking for, so we can answer it better. But some ideas, if you're going for kind of an ambient guitar, like cleaner guitar sound, try adding some reverb, delay. You could maybe try adding a chorus effect. Contact, or it's not Contact, it's Guitar Rig 5, I think, is the name of the plugin that I have by Native Instruments. That they have some pretty good like amplifier emulations and stuff like that. What's up?
David, I have a question.
Hang on, dude. Can you mute your mic and let me finish answering this question, and then I'll get to you.
About that.
All right, I'll get right back to you, man. Let me just wrap this up. So yeah, they have some good guitar emulation plugins and stuff. Ian, do you know of any other companies that make good guitar emulation plugins?
Yeah, the one that David's talking about right now is specifically Guitar Rig Player. So that's free. They have a full version that has a ton of presets that you'll never go through, but the player is plenty for sure. And then Cakewalk, which is owned by BandLab now, they have something that's called THU or TH something, but it's a guitar amplifier plugin that works just like Guitar Rig. That's free, but you would have to run that through the Cakewalk DAW. But it's worth it. I actually like it better than the Guitar Rig effects. And then if you're inside of FL Studio, Destructor has some cabinet presets that can change your tone. Hardcore, if you own FL Studio Signature Edition, which I don't, I have Producer, but if you have the Signature bundle, that comes with Hardcore, which is a guitar effects rack that has a bunch of amps and stuff in it and pedals. So that's pretty cool. And then last but not least, but in terms of actually playing guitar inside of FL Studio, like if you're using the piano roll, definitely look at the strum tool and look at just overall humanization. And then in terms of the actual instrument itself, Slayer is actually a pretty good plugin if you're using electric guitar, but it just takes a little while to really dial in the settings. Another free plugin is Ample Guitar Lite. I think they're on like version 3 now, but that actually has a setting where you could switch it from keyboard mode to guitar mode. And when you press down your chords on your keyboard, it actually plays the exact strings that you would hit on a guitar versus playing it as if you're playing a piano. So it has a lot more of it has a much more realistic sound to it. But yeah, that's pretty much what I would say about guitar in FL Studio.
One last plugin that I don't think you mentioned that I recently downloaded and I actually think it's really good. The user interface is kind of not the best, but it's called DSK Dynamic Guitars. So that's another good emulation plugin there.
Yeah, I actually have a tutorial on that one. I specifically will layer dynamic guitars with the ample guitar, and I love the tone out of that. But just keep in mind that when you do that, you don't get you'll lose that feeling, that vibe that ample guitar creates with the guitar feature. But it might be worth it to you because the overall tone and the inflections that DSK Dynamic Guitars does for you is much better than the ample guitar. And honestly, probably the best free guitar plugin overall in terms of the inflections that it has. Because if you go full velocity on dynamic guitars, it has this nice little I forget what to call it, but like a nice little pitch bend on the note that sounds really nice. So definitely check out DSK for sure.
Cool. Yeah. K before L, let's go ahead and take. Oh, actually, before we're gonna get to you in 1 second, I promise, dude. Let me just add on one last thing. One thing that I like to do with guitars, processing wise, is add bad tape or isotope vinyl. Isotope vinyl is like, a lo-fi plugin, emulator plugin that gives it this sort of, you can get like kind of a worse sound out of it. And depending on what you're going for, I really like using that plugin on actually more than just guitar, a lot of different things. So that's kind of it. K before L, let's go ahead and take your question and then we'll wrap this up. You can unmute. Okay.
Yeah. My question is regarding guitar melodies and stuff. So I use Ample Guitar and AGML both, and also Guitar Rig. So I can write pretty great chords in the piano roll in FL. And actually, I don't have a guitar right now, so I don't know how to write melodies with pitch bend and stuff inside FL's own piano roll. I have also tried even the strum tool and the claw machine tool, but nothing seems to work. It doesn't sound realistic enough or catchy enough like one in Griffin or Illenium's song. So do you have any tips for that?
Ian, can you mute your thing again, K before L? Thanks, man. Ian, I'm gonna toss this one to you if you don't mind, because it seems like you kind of know more about this stuff than I do.
Yeah, those Illenium guitars, he's using a jazz guitar, so that's a very different sound than the ample guitar that you're using. The only ample guitar that's going to come close to exactly what you're going for, I know exactly what you're going for, I know what you're talking about, is the hollow body, the semi-hollow guitar from Ample Guitar. That's going to nail exactly what you're looking for. So it's really about your sound source right now. You're not going to be able to achieve that Illenium sound with that acoustic guitar because first of all, he's using an electric guitar, and second of all, it's a jazz guitar. So those are really popular in trap music too. That's why I know so much about them. I know Nick Mira, he has a Jazz Master. I think Kyle Stemberger, he has a Jazz Master. Those are pretty expensive guitars, guys. So yeah, one, they're real guitars. Two, they're really expensive guitars. And three, the good news about that, all the processing is done inside of the box. So a lot of them are using just your stock effects and stuff. So really, I think your situation, you're really looking for the actual sound, the sound source that Illenium is using, and that's a real guitar. And the closest that I've heard to that is the semi-hollow from Ample Guitar, which I've talked to them about, but unfortunately, I wasn't able to land a deal with them in terms of doing some tutorials for them. But that guitar is definitely low on everyone's radar. I don't see any videos on it. I don't see people talking about it, but that's the one. Go to ampleguitar.com. I believe that's their website. Listen to those demos. And then when we come back next week, let me know if that's the sound that you're looking for. But it's on sale right now for $120. It's usually like $160. Out of all the guitars that I've heard, Native Instruments, the other Ample guitars, who's another guitar company? Literally all the guitars that I've ever heard, I haven't heard anything better than Ample Guitars semi-hollow for that specific use. So definitely check that out.
It's pretty hard to emulate a real guitar sound.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'd say that's probably, besides brass, that's probably the hardest.
Yeah, dude, I'll definitely check that out. Also, do you have any tips for like pitch bend and stuff inside the piano roll? Or do I automate that?
Yeah, the pitch bending for specific instruments, they'll have that built in, and that's called legato. Depending on, I think for Ample Guitar, it's specifically called legato. So you want to turn that on inside of Ample Guitar, and that'll allow you to pitch bend whenever you're overlapping the notes inside of the piano roll inside of FL Studio. Besides that, the only other way to pitch bend the notes would be to, actually there's two other ways. The other way would be to sample your guitar, like the one shots, and then you would be able to pitch bend the samples with FL Studio's built-in slide note feature inside of the piano roll, which I'm sure you're familiar with. The other way would be to actually automate the pitch. That's probably not something that I recommend because I'm thinking that depending on the VST that you're using, that pitch bend isn't going to sound natural. So you really want a guitar that's that has that built in, and the Ample guitars do have that built in. So the premium ones. I think the free Ample guitar, the one that you're using, I think that does have it, but it doesn't sound very good to me. It really doesn't. But the premium ones sound great. But I think it's just because it's an acoustic guitar and the slide on it isn't very prominent. But yeah, if you want a really prominent slide with the Ample guitars, I would actually recommend sampling that one slide note where you want to slide, sample the note that you're going to slide into or the note that you're sliding from, and then use FL Studio's pitch bend with that. That's probably going to give you the most natural result compared to the other ways.
Okay, before L, I just want to add on something here real quick. So if you don't have the option of getting an actual guitar, because ultimately getting a guitar, like if you want to make a lot of tracks that features guitar and you want that realistic guitar sound, it's like getting an actual guitar is going to be probably your best bet. But if that's not an option, then I think maybe the next best thing, aside, I'm not really that familiar with the plugin that Ian's talking about, so definitely check that out. I'm going to look into it as well. But I have a guitar, which is part of the reason I don't know as much about these plugins and stuff. Well, yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, was you could just use guitar loops and guitar samples. And I'm sure there are packs out there which feature guitar samples that have like actual one-shots that you can use. And another resource that I use sometimes that I don't think a lot of people know about is a website called freesound.org. And that is going to have, they have like a lot of like Creative Commons 0 samples that people just post in there. A lot of it's not very good, but some of it is actually really good. So if you don't have access to Splice, check out freesound.org. They have some potential free stuff in there that you can use that is Creative Commons 0, which means that you don't have to give credit to anybody. You can just use it in your productions, and potentially you might be able to work something out there. Let's go ahead and move on to, we got a couple new people in here. Does any of the newcomers have any questions? Wave Tracks, do you have any questions? Are you just hanging out? He might not have a mic. Is it Gachiri? I'm not hearing you. He might not have a mic either. Am I saying that right? Gachiri? Is that how you pronounce that? Okay, cool. Do you have any questions? Or are you just hanging out? Gotcha. Well, feel free to come back next week. We're going to be doing this K4L. Thanks, guys. Okay, cool. All right, well, yeah, like I was saying, feel free to come back next week. We're going to be doing this every Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern time zone. And, yeah, if you have any questions while you're getting, acquainted with, are you using FL Studio, I'm assuming? Whatever DAW you're using, if you have any production questions, feel free to join the Q&As and ask. So I guess we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Ian, thanks so much for being the co-host today and helping out. And I guess I'll see you guys all next week.
See you guys next week.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.